Nobody actually knew that Gellhorn was a composer. He was a famous conductor, he was a coach admired by singers, and he was a fabulous pianist. But it wasn't until I saw this film of him introducing his scores that I realized that there was a substantial body of work and that it could be found in the British Library. This project really is about rediscovering Gellhorn's music. And it's also about looking at his musicianship and what he stood for as a musician.
Peter Gellhorn was born in 1912 in what was Breslau in Germany. It's better known today as Wrocław in Poland. And he lived there with his parents, his father Alfred, his mother Elsa, and his younger sister Anneliese.
His father, Alfred Gellhorn, was a sort of dashing officer in the army, so he wasn't there all the time.
And it seems that after the war he didn't fully return to the family. And at some point his parents separated and later divorced.
When my dad was about 9, they moved to Berlin, where his father lived on one side of Berlin, and they lived on the other side, in Charlottenburg.
Peter remembers this as quite a difficult time, because apart from the separation from his family, it was also a very unstable period in German history. This is the time of the Weimar Republic and also the hyperinflation of the early 1920s, so it was quite a difficult time.
He supported his family from the age of 13. He always wanted to give money, and I mean, a phone call with him, the first thing he would say was, do you have enough to eat? Because that, in his childhood, was a very significant issue.
And I think it was when they moved to Berlin that my dad, aged 9 or so, began to learn the piano.
And by the age of 16, he'd enrolled at the Hochschule für Musik in Berlin as a piano student and completed his studies in 1932, winning the gold medal as well as his diploma. In the meantime, however, the National Socialist Party had come to power in Germany, and this changed things quite dramatically for Peter.
If you wanted to die, that was easy. And go in the tube and do this to somebody, and somebody would watch you and say, you said something seditious. If you want to die, but most people want to live.
Luckily for Peter, he had a very good friend in Lotte Reiniger, as a filmmaker. He'd already written some film scores for her, and she was a very good friend. She introduced him to some friends from England, Philip Loretz and Lionel Robbins, and between them they agreed that they would write a letter inviting him to England for what they called a holiday.
She commissioned him to make the music for her silhouette films.
On arrival in England in 1935, he lived in Ascot briefly with Philip Loretz, but then went to London and found work at Toynbee Hall in the East End of London. And here he seemed to thrive. He taught piano, he conducted chamber groups, he wrote incidental music for plays, he composed several pieces, and he also conducted his first opera in a production of Gluck's Orfeo in 1939. So things seemed to be going well for him. He was making a name for himself, building a career as a musician in London. But of course the beginning of the war in 1939 changed circumstances again. So Toynbee Hall was closed for the duration of the war, and Peter initially went to stay with friends in Devon. But when he came back to London in 1940, he was arrested. He'd by then been classed as an enemy alien, so he was arrested and sent to an internment camp on the Isle of Man.
In that internment camp, I gave more recitals than ever in my life, I think. Never stopped. I taught music, I read the blackboard, I taught harmony, and never stopped.
This period in Peter's life, again, was quite productive in many ways. He made a lot of very important contacts, so he was there with many other German and Austrian refugees, and he met people such as Hans Keller or the pianist Paul Hamburger. And he's very active. He again gave many piano recitals, which he had to build from memory. He wasn't allowed to bring any printed music with him. He composed, he taught music, he ran a choir, he played the organ in the church. He did many, many things there and was very active. But all the time was, of course, campaigning for his release. And here he had the support of Vaughan Williams. Ralph Vaughan Williams was very active in campaigning for musicians and internees. So he's eventually released in 1941. In 1943 he was also called up for war work, and he eventually found himself working in an electrical factory in London, so where he was required to check components for aircraft and so on.
He was measuring parts for bombers, for the aeroplanes, and he was meticulous. He kept a notebook with all the measurements in. And
he continued conducting, he continued with his musical life. He carried on conducting whenever the Sadler's Wells Company was in London, he would conduct for them. So he managed to continue working until the end of the war, when he was able to start working properly again. From there, he went to the Royal Opera House, and this is the first major appointment. He was assistant to the director of music, Carl Rankel, and not only did he prepare the productions, but he conducted many of them, and he believed to have conducted about 270 different performances, either in the Royal Opera House or on tour in places such as Liverpool or Edinburgh. Once Carl Rankel left, Peter carried on, but eventually left himself and moved to Glyndebourne in the mid-50s from 1954 onwards, where again he was conductor and chorus master, and he worked on many productions there.
He always loved being there. He knew Sir George Christie, who'd founded it, and his wife very well. He was a resident in the Glyndebourne house during the opera season. He had his own room.
Nothing slipped past that man. And the way he made us work, this relentless search, and of course the Glyndebourne chorus was and still is an absolute byword for excellence. And if you are there, it is a mark of your ability.
He was a brilliant pianist. He knew all his Mozart operas by heart, with instruments, because he was a conductor. I mean, he came into a chorus section and he played all and sang all the parts and then brought us in and told us about it. I mean, he illuminated everything that we did.
As a conductor, I saw his personality change from being the very kind, very compassionate, but very strict chorus master to something else. He became the conductor, Peter Gellhorn.
But this period of life seems a bit different. He gradually became uneasy. He wasn't being offered the sort of work he wanted. It was clear that he wanted to be a conductor, but he was increasingly being offered work as a chorus master. And so he then moved to the BBC for what was really the last major appointment of his professional career.
And he had an office on Great Portland Street, and I was allowed to go up, and I saw his desk and all the paperwork involved in it. And he was doing lots of recordings. And
so he became the director of the BBC Singers, or what was known as the BBC Chorus at the time, and worked there from 1961 to 1972. After his retirement from the BBC in 1972, he worked heavily as a coach and as a teacher. And teaching had always been an important part of his life, but it took on a new significance now. He was employed as a professor at the Guildhall School of Music, where he was a coach and a conductor in the opera school there. And he also worked at the opera school in the Royal College of Music, and again was employed as a director and conductor. And we know he conducted a production of Ariadne auf Naxos in 1981. After Peter Gellhorn's death in 2004, his family donated his scores and his papers to the British Library. And this has been an invaluable source for us here at the Royal College of Music working on this project. We've taken copies of the scores, usually digital photos, and used those to transcribe the works into modern musical notation. We've then been able to give those to performers here in the college and perform the works, first of all in workshops and also in concert.
We made performing editions of the pieces in the British Library of the manuscripts, and we were very lucky that at the Royal College of Music here in London we have fabulous composers and musicians who can do that quite quickly. And then we invited musicians to perform this music in workshops and to work on the music, and we had a whole series of workshops where we were able to really make our way into the music together.
Discovering Gellhorn's music was an absolutely fascinating journey for all of us, because when we first received the score, just by visually looking at it, it just looked like, you know, any other string quartet, until we came to the first rehearsal and played, and actually, gosh, it sounded so different to anything we have worked on before, just because of the movement of his melodies and his harmonic language and the length of phrases. And there were so many things that were unpredictable and things that you wouldn't normally do in certain places, you wouldn't normally expect in certain places. So it was a different experience from visually having looked at the score and actually having to play it. I think listening to one work is probably not enough. You have to listen to several of his works, and then you start to get his kind of style and his sense of humor and his sense of irony. And because he put so much of his personality into his compositions, then you get used to the kind of man he probably was.
When I heard about this grant to work on his pieces, I was absolutely blown away and delighted, and I was so happy for him, because it gives a little bit of recognition in an area that he didn't have in his lifetime, and I think would have made him tremendously happy.
So all the information we've collected about Peter Gellhorn, all the sheet music and the performance videos and also the oral history interviews will remain available on the website.